see that? I had him working this morning extra because I told him not to turn anything on until I was done with all of that. And so he's back there paying attention. So go to 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 4. Let me share a text with you. This will springboard into our studies for this morning. We talk a lot about the promises of God, and rightly so, because they are what we're relying upon. Our whole faith system, if you will, and for lack of a better description of that, is based on the idea that we're trusting in promises that God has made to us. Now, obviously, we could back that up a step or two further and talk about why it is that we trust God and why it is we believe in God. We don't have time for all that this morning. So let me just accept that as a basis and recognize together with you this morning that we are counting on some pretty tremendous promises that God has made. And those promises are the foundation for the faith and the convictions that we have in Jesus and in our Creator. In 2 Peter chapter 1 and in verse 4, he says, by which, speaking of these promises, or by which we have been given to us exceedingly great and precious promises, that through these you may be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. The manner in which we escape the things of this world and the sins and challenges of it, the way that we stay out of corruption, is anchoring ourselves, according to this text, anchoring ourselves into the promises of God. And that our relying on the promises of God allows us to escape and to overcome and to win the battles over the things that might tempt and challenge us in this life. And what I want to do with you this morning is just kind of walk through some of these promises. When he talks about these exceedingly great and wonderful promises that bring all these benefits to us, what are they? What has God said, this is what I'm going to do, and how does that benefit me? But before we get into specifics of those, let me share with you a couple of other things. First, let's recognize the origins of those promises. In Galatians chapter 3 and in verse 7, we'll look at two verses in this text. But Galatians chapter 3, verse 7, he says, therefore, know, I'll give you a second, I always hear, when I hear the pages turning, I should slow down, right? Give you a chance to get there. Galatians chapter 3, verse 7. He says, therefore know that only those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. We become sons of Abraham. Now jump to verse 16. He says, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to your seed who is Christ. And so you say, how can I be an heir to Abraham and any promises made to him? How is it that living before the laws of Moses and before the days of Jesus, how can I connect to something that happened so far back in the days of Abraham? And the manner in which I do that is that I'm relying upon that single promise of import. That's overstating it. But of all the promises made to Abraham, there was one great promise, if you will. And that is that ultimately through his lineage, Jesus would come. The seed, the Christ, which is Christ, the text says, Jesus was going to come. And through him, all the promises would be fulfilled. And so what I want you to recognize is that when you put your faith in Jesus, when you trust in the promises of Christ and of God, you're relying upon something that has been spoken about clear back in the days of Abraham. Clear back in the days of the patriarchs, God was already talking about an ultimate promise of salvation through His Son, the seed that would ultimately come. God's been promising salvation for a long time. God has anchored mankind in a concept of salvation that is to come through His gift of His Son for a long, long time. And so the promises of God have deep origins. They have very deep-rooted foundations, even clear back into the days of Abraham. Now go to that text that was read for us a few moments ago in Jeremiah chapter 32. In Jeremiah chapter 32, I believe you've got kind of a twofold conversation going on. You have one side of the conversation is the restoration of God's people. And so Jeremiah is looking for that. He's hoping for that. And so you've kind of got that context working. But you have a secondary context, if you will, working and talking about God and His connection to His people in an overall sense. Not just His people that he's dealing with in the days of Jeremiah, but those who would come in the future. In verse 38, Jeremiah chapter 32, they shall be my people, and I will be their God. I want to come back to that in a second. Then I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever, for the good of them and their children after them, those who would follow. And I will make an everlasting covenant with them, that I will not turn away from doing them good. But I will put my fear in their hearts, so that they will not depart from me. Yes, I will rejoice over them to do them good, and I will assuredly plant them in this land with all my heart and with all my soul. That text is where I want you to think about with me for a few moments today. Number one, he says, I will be your God. I probably ought to just stay right there the whole time this morning, and I should probably just stop talking. And all of you are going like this, right? I should probably just stop talking and let you think about that for a minute. I will be your God. I will use everything that divinity allows to your benefit. I will be your God. If you will trust in my promises, if you will anchor yourself in me, if you will attach yourself to the gifts and things that I won't be your friend, your buddy, your pal. Okay? There's a concept of friendship, I realize, within Scripture in relationship to God, so you could have that conversation, but it's bigger than that. Okay? When you and I are connected to God, it's bigger than just a friendship. It's bigger than just you have the power of divinity. You have power of God Himself working with and for you when you belong to Him. I've got some nice friends who do some very nice things for me from time to time, but none of them bring to bear the power of God. None of them bring along with them the character of Jehovah. None of them bring to bear in that relationship who God is and the strength that He brings. I'll be your God. I'll just, it's an overwhelming thought. I'll be your God. And everything that I have and am as God, I'll bring to bear to your benefit. And I'll strengthen you in. So what kinds of things did He say? Well, He said in Jeremiah 32, He said, I will give them one heart. I'll give my people one heart. You think about how interconnected you have to be to share one heart. Tonight, in our continued study of the 6 things God hates and 7 are abomination to Him, out of Proverbs 6, as we come back to that tonight, we're going to talk about that He says He hates sowing discord among brethren. Here is one way to avoid that. Recognize that God says that we should have one heart, one purpose, one mindset, one interconnection that binds us to our great Creator. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6, Deuteronomy 30, verse 6, He said, And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that ye may live. There are various contexts, by the way, that use that basic phrase. Love the Lord the God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. You see that stated in various ways throughout Scripture. And the point is very clear. God has in mind for His people one heart. One heart that is purely, completely, totally dedicated to who He is and what He brings into that relationship. There's one mindset that you have to be His child. There is one heart that has required of us in order to be staying connected to Him, and that one heart is that I love Him above all others. From heart, soul, mind, everything about myself, I am that connected to the Creator. I'll give them that mindset if they'll be my children, God said. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22. 1 Peter chapter 1 and in verse 22. He says, since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit, in sincere love of the brethren, love one another fervently with a pure heart. I will give them one heart, a purified heart, a mindset that wants to honor and serve God and those who are connected to Him. And that'll bleed into tonight's study, so I'm not going any further with that thought in the moment. He also said, I will give them one way. A promise of God. I will give them one heart. He said, if they will be my children, I will give them one way. I don't know about you. Maybe you're more complex than I am. I hope so in some ways. But I'm very simple. And the greater simplified things can be, the better off I am. I don't, in a lot of ways, I don't like multiple choice. I like a single path. This is the direction you're supposed to go. This is what you're supposed to do. And I find myself sometimes challenged when too many options are put out before me. It's harder that way sometimes. It makes life difficult when there are just way too many things in front of you, and they all appear to be equally as beneficial. And so what He says to us, if I will be His child, and I let God be my God, He promises me, I'll give you a single mindset that you need to have. I'll just give you one way. You're not going to have to worry about all the different ways. You're not going to have to worry about whether you're on the right one. If you just focus on the one that I give you, then you can stay the course. Jesus said it in what manner in John 14, verse 6. He said what? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one cometh unto the Father but by me. God says, I'll be your God. I make the promise that I will be exactly who I am to you if you'll be my children. But He also said in the words of Jesus, there is a way, and Jesus is that way. And God promised that there would be one way in order to reach Him. One way that we could find ourselves in relationship to Him. And you don't have to guess then. You don't have to wonder. You just look to God's Word. You just look to the path that He set before us in the pages of His Word. And we accept the promise, of that one way. Verse 3 of chapter 4 of Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3. He said, enduring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. God understood that if He presented multiple ways, multiple faiths, multiple ideas, that would only lead to chaos and confusion. And you know how that I know that's true? That if you've got multiple faith and multiple ideas and multiple concepts that are leading us religiously and spiritually, that adds to confusion, because the religious world is confused right now, isn't it? I know that to be true because the religious world is a very confusing place. If you walk into the religious world right now not knowing anything, and you began to examine all the various faiths, plural, we even say it that way. Man has even gotten so comfortable with that concept that we even use that kind of phrase as if it doesn't mean anything. As if it's an okay idea that there are faiths. That's not what Ephesians 4 said, is it? Ephesians 4 said there are one. And here's the sad reality. Folks see the confusing, chaotic religious world that we're in, and what they choose sometimes is no religion. I don't want any part of that. Because look, you got that church right there, they say this, that one down there says that one over there says this, and that one over there saying something else. I don't want any part of that world. God saw that coming. And He did everything He could to anchor us in His promises and get us to recognize that if we'll commit ourselves to one faith, one Lord, one baptism, one body, not many bodies. That's what the religious world has, many bodies. The Ephesian writer said, the Apostle Paul said, there is one body. And friends, it's not designed in that way so that one group can claim superiority It's not designed that way so that one group can be arrogant towards others and say, we're smarter than you, we're better than you, we know the God better than you do. It is not about superiority among the people. The idea of one body is to honor the one head, which is Christ. The idea of the one body is to avoid the confusing, chaotic things that men does with religion. And so that we can anchor ourselves in the promises of God. There is one way. I could have a way. You could have a way. Everybody in Payton City could have a way. But there's only one that means anything. There's only one that has any value. And this morning I would encourage you not to trust in my way or your way or the way that's offered to you down the street. I would implore you to not become religiously indifferent because you see all the chaotic, various thoughts about the same things among religion. And just dig your heels into the way. Not the way right here. Just dig yourself into the way right here. And trust in the promises of God that come with it. I will be their God. They will be my children. I will give them one heart. I will give them one way. And I will put fear in their heart. The greatest danger of man. I'll backpedal half a step. A great danger to man is when we don't fear God anymore. When men get to a point where we are so confident in ourselves and we are so confident in our understanding of our universe, in our world, and we're so confident in some ways of what we believe in God, irregardless of whether the Bible has told us that or not. That's becoming more and more prevalent, by the way, among religious people. That they would rather trust what they feel in their heart than what they can read on the page. That's a dangerous place to be. And that's not. And by the way, that's among every group. That's among every group. There are no religious bodies who are immune from that problem, where there are members among them who are beginning to believe in the concept that what they feel in their heart is superior to what's written on the page. And that's not fearing God, is it? He said, my children will fear me. My children will honor what's on the page, not what their heart tells them. Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is man's all. Fear God and keep whose commandments? His commandments. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man. This is what I'm all about, if I am of God. God says, I'm going to put fear in their heart, because that fear, if it's maintained, that fear, that respect, that character of being awe of God, will keep the honest, will keep the fearful in connection to my commands. I know that we would love to live in a more subjective world, but we can't in terms of spiritual things. Would it in some people's minds simplify things if I could just rely upon what I felt about something? If I could just rely upon how I feel in order to guide, direct, and make decisions for me? But God says, my children will fear me first. They'll respond to my commandments because of that. And in so doing, they will remain my children and I will remain their God. Quite simply, the one heart, the one way, needs to respect God. And when I feel differently than God has spoken, then disregard me. I've got to disregard me, not disregard God. In Acts chapter 13, verse 16. Paul stood before them, beckons or motions with the hand to get their attention, requesting their ears. And he says, Men of Israel, and you who fear God, listen. You remove the fear of God, we don't listen anymore. You don't listen anymore. You remove that respect, that fear for God, then people just don't listen anymore. And when we've done that, we challenge ourselves in the promises of God. I'll put fear in their hearts, those who will honor me, and they'll follow my commands. And then God said in Jeremiah 32, I will not turn away. Let that one sink in for a minute. That's a promise that God has made. If you'll let me be your God and you will be my children, I will never turn away from you. I will always be there. You can anchor yourself in me. The psalmist said in Psalm 37, verse 25. Psalm 37 and verse 25. The psalmist said, I have been young and now I am old. Yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his descendants begging bread. Now I want you to recognize something very quickly with me. Anytime you come to this text, it brings up issues and people have questions. Notice the phrase is, I have not seen his people begging bread. He did not say that his people would never have hardship. They'd never have difficulty. They'd never have a pain. They'd never have poverty. What he said was, I'll care for them. I will strengthen them. I will be their God. If they'll keep their minds focused on me, they'll never have to experience the feel of being forsaken. Even though the very same psalmist often wrote about the feeling of being forsaken. Isn't that interesting? They recognize in moments of weakness, I feel forsaken. In moments where I've disconnected myself from God, I feel the distances. But if you will stay in tune with Him, I'm not going anywhere, God says. And if He will stay, then we can stay. God says, I will not turn away. Therefore, you shouldn't turn away. In Acts chapter 13 and verse 46, then Paul and Barnabas grew bold and said it was necessary that the word of God should be spoken to you first. But since you reject it and judge yourselves unworthy of everlasting life, behold, we turn to the Gentiles. The choice is ours. If we'll recognize the dedication of God, if we'll anchor ourselves in the promises that He has made, if we will assure ourselves in those great promises that God has extended unto us, then we'll benefit from it. But He says, you choose. You can judge yourselves unworthy of everlasting life. One of the scariest aspects of condemnation to me is simply this, that every person who will receive the condemnation of God someday will have judged themselves in that issue. Don't ever feel compelled as though somebody's placing you in the position of judge. I will not, cannot, shall not, won't, whatever word you want to use, judge anybody and condemn their soul to hell. Can't do it. I can't do it. It's not within my powers and abilities to do. The way folks find themselves in the condemnation of God, according to the apostle, is they judge themselves by rejecting Jesus. So don't ever feel compelled to be in position of judge and jury over somebody's soul. Just don't walk that path, because it's not my place. My simple responsibility is to encourage everybody to stay with the promises of God. My responsibility is to encourage everybody to stay with the pattern and teaching of what Jesus has offered. To trust in the promises. Let that one heart be your heart. Let that pure heart reign true in your life. Let God's way be your way. Let God's teachings be your following. Let yourself be given to His commands. Be fearful of Him. Respect Him. Let His writings and things that He's taught us overrule anything that I might feel or think in my own heart and mind. And recognize that someday if I stand condemned in the eyes of God, there will be but one person responsible for that, and it is Brian. If I stand condemned in the eyes of God someday, there will be but one reason and one person who will be responsible for that. And it'll be me. It will not be because so-and-so didn't give me the right example, and so-and-so didn't help me along the way, and so-and-so said this to me, and so-and-so said that to me. And all of those things can have bearing on the decisions and choices we make. But I'm begging you this morning to not let what man does affect what you do in your relationship with God. I'm going to fail you someday. Because I'm just as human as you are. There'll be some point in time where I don't say the right thing in the right moment. There'll be some point in time where I don't push the right button at the right where I fail. Where I should have spoke and I didn't, or I shouldn't and I did. But what I'm begging you to do this morning is simply this. I'm not asking you to trust in any promises I've made to you. I'm asking you to trust in the promises that God made to you. I'm asking you this morning to just forget about all the hurt feelings and all the supposed hypocrisies that you've seen, or the real hypocrisies that you've seen. I'm asking you to cast aside all the human side of this conversation, because the promises aren't rooted in humans. The promises are rooted in God. And so I'm begging you this morning to throw all that stuff away and start trusting in the promises of God in your life. Because someday I'll have to answer to God, and He's not going to accept my list of complaints as to who wronged me and who said boo to me at the wrong moment, and who. He's not going to accept my list. I'm not saying people have right to hurt you. I'm not saying people have right. They'll meet their God too someday, if they've rendered evil towards you. God will bring vengeance upon that as well someday. I'm just asking all this morning that let's trust in the great and exceeding promises of God. And pick and choose that one heart. Choose that one way. Choose that God who says, if you'll be my child, I'll be your God. And I'll bring everything that I am as God to bear in your life. And say to yourself, I don't want to choose. I don't want to judge myself unworthy of everlasting life. I want to stand before God one day as a humble servant, longing for the mercy and grace of a great God. Will you trust the promises of God? Grab your psalm book. As we do on most occasions, if not all occasions, that we assemble together, we offer an opportunity for you to put your life in the right relationship with God and trust in His promises. I surrender all. Is that right, Dave? Okay. Just want to make sure I had it right. Nothing like talking up the wrong song during the invitation and making the song leader sweat. But I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender. Give up all the baggage. Just put it all aside. I surrender all. I'm coming to Jesus. I'm going to trust in His promises. Can we encourage you in that this morning? Seek salvation. Put your soul and your life in the hands of God, who makes some great promises that He will reliably honor. Maybe you've never known forgiveness of sins through baptism. Maybe that's been part of your past, but some things are amiss that we could pray for you concerning today. Say it's time to put aside all the things that have been hindering me, and it's time for me to have one heart that trusts in God. I want to listen to His voice and His alone. And if we could help you surrender to Jesus even this hour, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?